I'm going to kick us off. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Trina McVicker. I'm the Regional Director of Client Relations for the QTI Group and the President of the Sauk Columbia SHRM chapter. I'm excited to introduce our speaker today. Summer Rector is QTI's VP of HR Consulting and previously worked at Mercer, Day9, Accenture, and HCSC. Summer also serves as a SHRM Learning System Instructor, Graduate School of Banking HR Management School faculty member, and UW-Madison HR guest lecturer. She holds a BBA degree in MHR from UW-Madison and the SHRM SCP designation. So Summer, thank you so much for presenting today.
Thank you, Trina, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We are excited to share with you the 7 must-haves to engage and ensure productivity of a remote workforce. QTI is committed to helping organizations to reach their full potential through people, and that is our exact goal for you all today, is to help you reach your full potential through your people. A brief overview of our agenda. We'll start by framing the picture to make sure we're all on the same page when it comes to understanding remote work. We'll talk about coronavirus impact, forces driving, benefits, as well as challenges of remote work. From there, we'll move into the bulk of our webinar today, which is focused on the 7 must-haves to optimize productivity and engagement. Then we'll transition into some closing comments and provide you with some resources to take beyond this webinar, and we'll close with questions. As I'm going through the content today, I invite you to use the Q&A functionality of Zoom, which you can access by hovering your cursor over the bottom of the screen and selecting the Q&A icon. From there, you'll have an opportunity to privately message our moderator, Jill, any questions that you have, and then I'll try to get through as many of those as possible at the end of our time today. Let's start first with building our understanding of remote work. Well, coronavirus has had a huge impact, to say the least, on remote work. Before coronavirus, only 3.6% of the US workforce work remotely half-time or more. And fast forward just a few weeks, now it's estimated that 49% of the workforce is remote working right now. And we know that this would be higher if more jobs provided this ability. So certainly everyone who has that ability right now is working remotely. And we had that transition occur in just a few short weeks. Many forces are driving that remote work, and here just to hit on a few, of course there are legal mandates. So we know in the state of Wisconsin, it was just 2 weeks ago that Governor Evers enacted the Safer at Home order. We also know that there's the employer duty of care, right? We want to make sure that we're taking as best care as possible of our employees. There is that duty. There's been increased managerial trust of employees, as well as increased demand for cost savings, as well as employee demand to be able to flatten the curve and mitigate exposure to coronavirus, also driving remote work. So many forces at play here. We also know from extensive research on the benefits of remote work that it can benefit not only employers, but also employees as well. Some of the research we know shows that a typical employer can save about $11,000 per year for every person who works remotely half-time or more. Remote work is also associated with a 13% increase in performance, right? So employees are less distracted, they're more focused, and that leads to higher productivity. Remote work has also been shown to yield a 50% drop or decline in employee quit rates or voluntary turnover rates. So it's higher ability to retain talent. And then specific to coronavirus, work at home is estimated to save US employers over $30 billion per day in what would have been lost productivity if that remote work option were not available. So it's especially important right now to sustain our US economy. Now, for all the benefits of remote work, it is not free of challenges. For example, we know that space may be a challenge for some employees. Say they have a small home or apartment, they may not be able to have a dedicated room to support separation of work and life. Technology can also be a challenge if individuals are not used to using virtual meetings or platforms. That can also be some growing pains in getting employees trained up on those, or if they have broadband wireless connection issues, internet connection issues, that can also be a challenge. Children, I can speak to this one firsthand as a mom of two. I have a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, and they can certainly present, a challenge in how I'm structuring my day while also supporting them. As such, privacy can also play a role not only with children, but just others who may share the home with employees, particularly if the nature of the role is sensitive. Say, for example, somebody is processing payroll. That can also provide some challenge. Loneliness, we know that right now, not only are employees being asked to socially distance themselves from colleagues, but also from friends and family. And so we are more at risk of loneliness setting in at this time. And then of course, choice. Prior to coronavirus, the ability to work remotely was viewed as a perk or a benefit of a job. And now we're at risk of that being viewed as more of a mandate, right? And so by eliminating that choice for some employees, mandating that they do work from home, we can damage the perceived benefits of remote work. Well, in the words of Albert Einstein, we know that in the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. And so I challenge you to find the opportunity in this situation, to try to make the most of it, to help your organization yield long-term success. With coronavirus, we know that in a matter of weeks, we had to transition, if we were not already, to a remote work 1.0 environment where we had to rapidly empower employees with the capability to work remotely. And so that was more of the mandate. But now we are provided choice, right, to elevate our goals to a remote work 2.0, whereby we're ensuring employees are staying connected, engaged, and productive in their work. But it's going to take some discipline and some planning for us to pull this elevation of goals from 1.0 to 2.0 off. And so that brings us to our 7 must-haves that we have curated for you to optimize productivity and engagement of your remote workforce. We're going to go through each one of these 7 must-haves. And as I'm going through, I'm going to share a lot of actionable advice and best practices, recommendations beyond the words that you're going to see in this presentation today. So if you have a notebook handy, I'm sure that you'll be able to take some notes and come away with some ideas for your organization that connect each one of these 7 must-haves. So let's begin with strong leadership. Strong leadership is crucial to guide employees through these uncharted coronavirus waters. I encourage you to think about your leaders almost as a lighthouse. Your leaders are beckoning employees to follow, to steer clear of danger, right? They're guiding them. They're that lighthouse through these uncharted waters. And by doing so, they're going to help employees to find greater purpose and direction in this challenging time. And it starts by doubling down on the fundamentals of good leadership. And I'm sure you're going to be familiar with some of these, but it's worth revisiting and in this time to make sure that we are best advising the leaders of our organizations. So some best practices in strong leadership include engaging and interacting with your team and making that a high priority. So it's important to have that engagement that is honored. So if there is a weekly check-in call between manager and employee, it's honoring that. Don't cancel that time. If something urgent comes up, reschedule it. Make sure that it is honored as a high priority. communicate the organization's needs, objectives, and strategies to get through these challenges, right? That we need to keep employees constantly informed so that they know that we are putting together plans to help sustain the organization during this time. And so it's really important to be keeping employees informed of that progress. It's also important to share as much information as possible without oversharing. For those who know me, you know that I'm a big fan of Brené Brown, and she does a great job in her book, Dare to Lead, talking about this concept of oversharing, right? Oversharing might be saying to employees, man, I don't know that the organization's gonna survive this difficult time, right? Where that can create some panic, versus sharing a more fact-based call message of, hey, we need to realize X dollars in savings in the next month, and here's some ideas that I have for how we can go about doing that. What ideas do you have? And that brings me to our next point, brainstorm with employees, empowering them to be part of the solution. So oftentimes employees are closer to those front lines and they've got good perspective of what is an essential operating expense and what is non-essential? What can be flexible in this time? What else could be considered to bring in additional revenue if that's something that's of need for your organization? So brainstorm with them. You're going to yield more fruitful results and solutions in the end. Strive to maintain a calm composure that embodies agility and patience. So during this time, we've had just a few weeks to process all that's transpired. It was only March 11th that the World Health Organization declared coronavirus a pandemic. I mean, that's less than a month that we've had to process, right? And so it's natural that emotions are gonna be at play. We wanna make sure, however, that we are not responding with those emotions, that we're just sticking to the facts, maintaining a calm composure, as we know that's gonna be best in ensuring engagement and productivity of our employees. It's also important, of course, as I'm sure you all know, to be an empathetic listener and supporter. Right now, employees are likely dealing with a lot of grief. Their world has changed dramatically, and there may be some personal hardship that they are experiencing within their family, within their friends, or them personally, should your organization be forced with difficult decisions around furloughs or layoffs, things like that we know are quite the challenge. And so it's really important to just demonstrate that empathy, be supportive, be a listener, and it may be pushing you to provide support beyond the typical professional support, but also personal support at this time as well. It's important that you stay positive. Employees are watching your lead, right? So we know through extensive SHRM teaching that one of the greatest drivers of employee engagement is their managers, it's their leaders. And so it's important that they are modeling that positive attitude. It's not to say it's overly optimistic and providing false hope, but it's just focusing on the positives that can be, the silver linings that can be found in these hard times. For example, one positive could be, just for your own knowledge, I heard that Wisconsin is the third lowest in unemployment claims. That's something that we as HR professionals can take pride in or joy in. Additionally, this may be a time when your organization is growing closer together. So trying to find those silver linings to stay positive, that's going to help employees to be more engaged. It's also going to help employees from an impact standpoint of these strong leadership tactics. It's going to help employees to move forward during these uncertain times and we know yield greater productivity as well as engagement. The second must-have is frequent and authentic communication. According to Plato, those who tell the stories rule society. And it's extremely important that we tell the stories within our organizations rather than letting employees, dictate those stories. because that's going to minimize assumptions of worst case scenarios, which we know will damage productivity and engagement. So it's really important that we are the narrator of those stories. And it's honest messages. You know, sometimes that term story can have a connotation of something that's fictional. It's fact-based stories, but it's making sure that we are providing that framing and that messaging. So some best practices associated with frequent and authentic communication include creating a source of truth channel, web page, or documents. Consider this to be a living page or document where you're constantly updating to keep employees informed during this rapidly changing time. It's going to be the source of information that employees can access to just remind themselves of what's real, what's going on. Be intentional with frequent, reliable communications. So have structured, regularly scheduled meetings. As an example, you might have a weekly all-company call. Perhaps it's 30 minutes and you've got video cameras turned on, but you have that at a structured, dedicated time, such that, you know, if there's any difficult messages that do need to be shared, you're not creating panic by throwing an ad hoc meeting on the calendar and causing a lot of worry and anxiety amongst employees. It's just a dedicated time. And even if it's a 5-minute update of things are still status quo, progressing as we discussed last week, that's helpful so that employees aren't, you know, making up their own, worries or minds about what might be going on. Craft a communication strategy that covers all modes of communication. So we know that people learn and receive information best in different ways. So for example, some prefer auditory, some prefer visual, or to be able to read the words. So make sure that you're covering all those aspects so that you are best enabling employees to understand the messages you're trying to convey. Establish daily check-ins, either one-on-one or a team call. So some best practices we recommend include, you know, at least once a week having a one-on-one with a manager and employee, as well as a weekly team call, if not daily. But at a minimum, you want to make sure that you're providing some type of daily check-in, be it through one-on-ones or team calls, whatever's best for your organization, more so as a check-in with each employee. You want to make sure that somebody's connecting with them, that they're doing okay during this time, and you're providing that support. Next, set and communicate hours of availability with the team and the best way to reach each other. So for example, I've communicated with my team just, you know, in the need to be a flexible schedule, knowing that I have my husband also working at home and 2 young kids without childcare. I've communicated to my team, you know, from 5 to 10 every morning. I'm one of those crazy morning people. I am have that uninterrupted time where I can be available to them. I can also make myself available after hours, but during, you know, midday, it might be a little challenging to reach me through email. So the best way in that case is to contact me through a text message or phone call. So make sure you're setting those expectations with your teams. Be flexible with employees where possible, where childcare or other types of family care, perhaps it's elderly parents or whatever, obligations or needs that employee has. Make sure that you're being flexible to the extent possible. Now we recognize not everybody's jobs allow for this. So for example, if you have somebody that's answering phones for your organization and you've got dedicated hours that they need to be available, you may have less flexibility in start and end times for work, but perhaps you can identify additional team members who can come in during certain points in the day and they can trade off to provide that flexibility, that support. Another best practice is to understand your team and how they like to receive information. And this goes broadly across your organization as well. So do your employees best receive information through one-on-one communication. Say there's a difficult message to share. Should that be the first means of sharing that information? Or is it fine to do an all-company call and then follow up with one-on-ones to check to see if the employee has any questions? So obviously it's not possible to satisfy everyone, but think about what's going to be best for the majority and then try to employ those methods. Be honest with employees regarding the focus of the organization during this uncertain times. So if there's financial hardship, acknowledge that with the organization, but provide perspective in a tangible way, such as we're trying to achieve this goal of cost savings, help us with that. Is going to be beneficial rather than blind or providing this rosy picture and then potentially blindsiding employees with furloughs or layoffs or pay cuts that come later. So it's important to provide that honesty in communications. Avoid using blanket statements, such as an example here is we put our employees first if the goal is actually to save as many jobs as possible while honoring bank covenants. We know from our SHRM teachings that culture is a manifestation of words and actions. And so we want to make sure that the words we are conveying are consistent with the actions that we need to take for the organization, because otherwise if there's misalignment there, it's going to create conflict. So as best as possible, we encourage you to avoid using those blanket statements. Now, the impact of frequent and authentic communication is that employees are going to get that necessary information to stay up to date. It's going to squelch rumors, reduce the risk of employees creating their own stories, and it's going to increase engagement by keeping employees in the loop. The third must-have is clear goals, priorities, and expectations. Someone once said that a man without a goal is like a ship without a rudder. And if you've noticed, I like metaphors, I like analogies. And so the analogy for this situation I find us in is that we are going down a rapidly moving river, right? And there's a lot of tight bends and curves in that river, and we can only see so far around the bend, right? Things are evolving on a daily basis. And as such, we need to be agile with our goals, our priorities, and expectations. So some best practices are to revisit employees' goals on a daily basis to make sure that they're appropriately focused. And this is especially important for those who are not used to working remotely. For example, if you are a retail organization and you have a retail associate who is now being asked to work remotely from their home, and as such their job duties have shifted. Perhaps you have them doing some administrative work for the organization during this time. Then in that case, you're going to be wanting to make sure you're providing more outreach perhaps than with others who are used to working remotely or having a bit more clarity in their daily work, such that you are helping to adjust priorities and maintain that appropriate focus. It's also important, as I mentioned, to set clear and tangible goals. So this is going to give employees greater purpose during this time, which we know is important, especially as some can be struggling just to move forward. So if you give them a tangible goal, such as we need to help the organization save $100,000, perhaps to offset some lost revenue or funds raised, by engaging employees in that goal, not only are you going to have a broader mix of solutions from which to choose, but you're also going to have greater buy-in from them. And you may be pleasantly surprised just by how willing employees are at self-sacrifice to help the organization. Say, for example, you communicate the goal is to save as many jobs as possible. You might be surprised by how willing some employees may be to go on unpaid leave or take pay cuts during this time to help the broader employee population as well as the organization pull through. We also encourage you to explore tools that can help make goal setting easier. So right now there's a lot of free tools and technology out there. And if you're like me, I feel like performance management, talent development, like those tools have a shorter lifespan than some others. So now's a great time to explore what other solutions are out there. One that I'm a fan of is called 15-5, and it's a great goal setting, performance, and recognition technology, which right now is available for teams up to 50 employees for free through June 15th. So I'd take advantage of that. And the concept of 15-5 stems from employees spending about 15 minutes a week updating progress on their activities list, their task list. Managers spend about 5 minutes reviewing that list. And then during the one-on-one conversation, manager and employee are freed up to then have more impactful dialogue about performance, expectation, just personal check-in. So it's removing that typical task list that can occupy the one-on-ones to provide greater impact and dialogue. So by setting clear goals, priorities, and expectations, we're going to maximize productivity that in the end is going to help our organizations come out of this crisis stronger than before. It's also going to ensure that we're making continuing to support those high-performing employees, that they're going to continue to be engaged. We definitely don't want to put that high performance at risk, as we know that's crucial, especially right now. And it's also going to mitigate the risk of aimless work and counterproductive work. Next, we encourage you to support employees in having a dedicated workplace and structure. So pre-coronavirus, employers mostly controlled the workspace in which employees occupied. So for example, perhaps employees could bring a plant or some personal photos, personal belongings, but the employer determined whether that employee was working from an office, a cubicle, on the shop floor, whatever that might be for your organization, employer predominantly had that control. Now, during coronavirus, to the extent that you have employees working remotely, that control has mostly shifted to employees. And for some who may be, struggling just to process the magnitude of this new environment that we find ourselves in, this can be a bit overwhelming. And so it's helpful for employers to support employees in getting the most out of their workspaces, because not only is that, maximized engagement and productivity beneficial for the employer, but it's also beneficial for employees, right? We all feel better if we've had a productive day out at work. We can take pride in that at the end of the day. So some best practices associated with this must-have are to encourage employees to have a dedicated workspace. Now, I fully understand that everybody is able to have a dedicated office. And so you can help employees with creative solutions. For example, one creative solution I've heard of is to use a bed sheet. Of course, you want to be safe about this, but standing on a chair to hang up a bed sheet to separate work from personal space can provide that greater ability to focus for the employee. And best practice recommendation is to have that space by a window for better lighting, which we know that sunlight can yield some positive effects on employees. You also want to encourage employees to make it a space that they want to work in. So taking favorite tables, chairs, hanging pictures. If you have folks that perhaps they don't have access to pieces of art or whatever it might be that they want to hang on their walls in this space. You can employ some team building activities at this time to draw pictures to hang as art behind the employee, and that can create a more inclusive environment, and it also just is good for team building. I encourage you to promote sharing of pictures of home working stations. It furthers that connection and engagement between employees. Of course, you want to be respectful that not everybody's going to be comfortable sharing that, but in that sharing, others are going to pick up on some tips and ideas for their own personal workspaces. Another best practice is to ask employees to establish a regular routine and to get work ready in whatever means that in whatever way that means for them. So you don't necessarily want to dictate, okay, you need to dress business casual during this time, don't be in pajamas, as some people may be more productive in pajamas. But I encourage you to invite employees to experiment. You know, what is it that helps you to be the most productive during the week? Try out different methods and see what works best for you. Also, remind employees to take regular breaks and set boundaries in their day to avoid burnout. I can speak to this firsthand. When I was working at D9 Accenture, I was implementing Workday for organizations around the globe. And so being in that global environment, you know, it's just constant barrage of emails at all hours of the day and tight deadlines in which to get the implementation done. And the majority of our workforce, myself included, we were remote because we were often traveling to clients. And as such, it created the opportunity to roll out of bed at 5 in the morning, immediately log in and start working, and then maybe not close a laptop until 10 at night. And I can tell you firsthand that leads to burnout. And so, you know, I advise you, if you haven't experienced this personally yourself, you know, educate your employees on that importance of boundaries, particularly if there are personal family commitments that the employee needs to honor. It's important to set those boundaries and be respectful of them. Of course, you want to educate employees on the importance of ergonomics, and we've included here a link to Mayo Clinic, which has some great tips on ergonomics, such as, you know, table height, chair height, those types of things that we know are going to keep employees working productively. Next, consider working with employees to learn how to deal with distractions at home. So this might be children, pets, just others that they occupy the home with, and provide flexible, you know, arrangements, brainstorm with them on solutions. So one best practice I've heard is to encourage employees to create signs. So they might hang a sign on that bed sheet partition I talked about, or perhaps it's on the door that provides notification to others they're sharing the home with that, okay, right now is an okay time to come in and interrupt if you have a question, or please do not walk in right now, I'm recording a webinar, or whatever it might be. This is a do not interrupt time. And that just helps all. Another best practice I heard is to set up structured time during the day called, you know, juice box breaks. Perhaps those with children who have a curiosity to be on webinars, be in videos, you can get them, give them that opportunity to release some of that curiosity through, maybe it's 15 minutes or 30 minutes one day of having juice box or snack and connecting with others within the organization who also have children or just would enjoy connecting with their colleagues in that way. And releasing that curiosity can lead to less interruptions throughout the day. Another best practice is to have employees share what is working with them. Perhaps it's through Teams or Slack channels, Yammer, whatever it might be for your organization. But sharing those best practices is going to help employees to identify creative solutions that'll best support their needs. So the impact of dedicated workplace and workspace and structure is through boundaries, limiting distractions, employees are going to be more productive. Sharing ideas is going to help everyone find the solutions that work best for them, and it's going to increase the joy of working remotely, yielding to greater employee engagement. The fifth must-have is technology to ease and enable. Now, we know that technology, it can either be a friend or an enemy, right? There's two ends of that spectrum. And so the key is to develop an effective technology strategy to support remote work. At a minimum, we want to be ensuring that employees have access to the appropriate technology for their jobs. And so they've got the documents, the information they need, adequate training for the tools, and how to use them. But best practice is to take it a step further. Proactively check in with employees on how those technology solutions are working for them. So for example, if you've educated someone on how to use Microsoft Teams a couple weeks ago, check in with them to see if they've unlocked some of the more advanced features, if they have any questions. By providing that proactive outreach, you're going to enable them to learn the technology faster, to be more comfortable with it, which we know is going to yield to greater productivity. Utilize communication technologies to allow for easy real-time communications. There's Zoom, there's Microsoft Teams, Slack. A lot of organizations are offering free access right now, such as Teams and some others. And so to the extent you can employ those technologies, the more you're going to be promoting connection amongst employees and keeping them informed. Next, set expectations around what, when, and how to use these technologies. So for example, what's appropriate to post on a Teams channel or a Slack channel? Can I share a coronavirus meme or not, as an example? Also, be sure to remind employees of best practices around when to use email or other modes of communication, such as Slack, Teams. Right now, we want to make sure that we're best supporting employees with mental wellness. So some best practices in email etiquette, such as if there's 30 folks copied on an email and you want to thank just one person, only direct that thank you message to one and spare the 29 others that clutter within their inbox. So thinking about some best practice tips like that can be helpful right now. Also, consider requiring video camera usage on check-in calls. I require this of my team because there's so much that you can communicate in body language, and so just being able to pick up on those visual cues is extremely helpful right now in boosting trust and connection. So by providing technology that eases and enables, again, thinking about making it more of a friend than an enemy, we're going to have greater impact on our organizations. We're going to be supporting employees by giving them that time that they need to adjust to working remotely. We want to make sure that we're demonstrating patience, positivity, celebrate the victories. Say they learn how to do something such as using the chat feature on Zoom, for example, for the first time, celebrate that victory. That's only going to yield to greater productivity faster. By providing that connection, making ourselves more accessible, we're going to have higher engagement and connection. And that's, of course, we want to make sure that in all of this, that we are securely sharing information. Again, that goes back to setting appropriate guidelines about what can be shared through what types of technology channels. The sixth must-have is care for employees' physical and emotional well-being. We know from extensive research from SHRM that there is, and other organizations, I should say, a strong positive correlation between well-being and employee engagement. And so we want to make sure that we are providing that support, especially right now, of well-being, particularly physical and emotional, because that's going to keep employees more productive and engaged, and then just benefit them in the long run as well. So some best practices to promote well-being include connecting with employees on a personal level, making sure that they're doing okay. Of course, you want to respect boundaries, but you also want to be providing that personal check-in. So it's okay to acknowledge the stress, the anxiety that employees may be facing right now, to empathize with any personal hardships they're going through. It's only going to boost that trust. And help them to move forward through this difficult time. If you have an employee assistance program, be sure to remind employees multiple times of this program and the ways in which to access it and how it benefits them, such as through counseling services that are available. Also, encourage employees to prioritize self-care. This is especially important if the employee is supporting others, say friends or family members during this time. So ask employees, what are you doing to care for yourself during this time? So maybe it's reading a book, listening to a book. There's a lot of free ones available right now. Perhaps it's going on a walk, just some way to recharge one's own self in order for them to then continue supporting others. Remind employees that it's important to take time to sleep, exercise, and engage in activities that calm and rejuvenate heart, mind, body, and spirit. And some best practices with this include, posting daily exercises that employees can elect to engage in. So Yoga Norman, if you haven't heard of him, he's got some great videos, particularly the neck stretch videos, I think are good as we think about working remotely and ergonomics. It's a good thing to engage in to minimize strain. So just those reminders are helpful for employees. Also, exploring applications that provide this type of support. There's a lot of free ones available right now. So Healthy Minds program is one. It's an app you can find in the App Store, and they've got great exercises to skill build and mental wellness. And actually, we're going to be featuring one of their chief contemplative officer, Dr. Cortland Dahl, on Friday in a webinar. And that is put on through QTI as well as Healthy Minds Innovations. And they'll be talking about resilience and finding resilience during times of crisis, as we know that that's only going to help us be more successful during this time. So if that's a webinar you have interest in joining, I invite you to go to the QTI page on LinkedIn, and you'll be able to find the information to join that webinar as well. Also, assign a work from home buddy. This is especially important if you have a manager that has many direct reports. By engaging others to provide those daily check-ins with colleagues. So, pairing folks up, that can be helpful to minimize the burden placed on managers in providing those daily check-ins. So in all this care for employees' physical and emotional well-being, we're going to increase engagement as well as productivity through less distraction, positive channels and outlets for employees to relieve stress. The seventh and final must-have is social connection. And so, a lot of the things we've talked about so far have been connecting to the minds of employees, but it's also important to connect with their hearts, right? We want to engage the whole employee in work and through our organizations. And so we encourage you to foster social connections that are going to connect with their hearts. And it's also going to help them to find greater meaning and joy to their lives as well. So some best practices with social connection include creating social channels on Slack, Teams, whatever modes that might be accessible for your organization, even just simple text messages in order to create that social connection. You can have theme days such as Pajama Day, Crazy Hair Day, Favorite Sports Team Day, whatever it might be, and encourage sharing of photos in appropriate means such as a social channel so that employees can have that connection. Share photos of new coworkers is another great idea, such as, kids or pets who are working alongside employees. Share work appropriate jokes, right? Sometimes levity and hardship can be helpful. And so of course you want to make sure that they're appropriate, set some parameters for this, but those jokes can just, add smiles to faces during this time when we know it might be difficult. Of course, you want to be sensitive to the timing of some of these things. So if there are any difficult transitions within the organization, you don't want to follow that right up with a joke. You want to space some things out, of course, but that can help those who are needing some levity to move through the situation. Launch a book club. There's a lot of free books available, even while, typical practice is to do some self-help or business-based books. Having some fiction books right now that provide distraction can also be welcome at this time. Encourage informal conversations about non-work topics. So a great practice is to have icebreaker questions available to employees, such that perhaps they choose one icebreaker question per team meeting. And this is helpful if you have folks who maybe their natural tendency is not to open up, but you still want to build those connections. So having an icebreaker question to start each team meeting can help in building those connections and that trust amongst employees. If you have folks that have hidden talents or passions, encourage them to host a lunch and learn to share that with others. So say, for example, you have somebody that is a barista, or they know how to knit, or they're an Excel guru and they want to share that passion with others. Invite them to do so. Be sure to leave time at the beginning or end of calls to catch up with people on a personal level. So when asking those questions, how are you? Make sure you're probing while still respecting boundaries to truly hear a response to that question and catch up with each other. Hold virtual pizza parties, recipe roundup lunches. So right now, a lot of us who are remote are being challenged to cook all our meals from home. And so this is a great time to curate recipes from across the organization and hold virtual, lunches to share those ideas with others and create some variety to meals. You can also hold virtual team meetups for coffee tasting, happy hours. There's this concept called tiny campfires, which is pretty fun, where there's an organization. If you search for tiny campfire, they can send your organization, or you could do this yourself, a little tea light candle to employees, a mini marshmallow and toothpick and little chocolate square graham crackers. And you can partake in some mini campfires together and do some storytelling during that time. You can play online games together. And so this is beyond, video games. There's fun office related ones, such as typing speed tests, or one of my favorites is called remote bingo. And so you think about putting together squares of common phrases that employees might hear throughout the week, such as, can you see me? Or can you hear me now? And so creating some fun and some excitement can go a long way. We also encourage you to continue celebrating birthdays and work anniversaries. So perhaps it's a monthly get together with employees just virtually to celebrate those meaningful moments in employees' lives. Permit employees to use the organization's technology for personal use. So to the extent that you can support them perhaps in using Zoom after hours or on weekends to connect with family, that's going to help their personal well-being as well. And then for more creative ideas, we've got a link here. This article has great 37 virtual team building activities, some fun things like pixel art in spreadsheets, so in Excel, and storytelling workshops, just great ways to continue to team build, but in a virtual setting. Social connection, the impact of this is gonna, of course, increase employee engagement, decrease feelings of isolation or loneliness, promote a greater sense of well-being, and then foster greater collaboration amongst employees. So just to close here before we open for questions, we've talked about these 7 must-haves for how to optimize remote work amongst your workforce, and we encourage you to take these actionable ideas we've shared and employ them within your organization. Again, making sure you're addressing each one of these 7 must-haves. We've also shared with you here a link to our resources that you can access as well after this webinar, which will be following up with a copy of not only these slides, but a link to today's recording. And one great page I recommend you consider is on our QTI page. We're regularly posting articles as well as links to additional resources. We're constantly keeping that up to date, so you can access that. We've got white papers and webinars such as on employment cost containment strategies, like I said, mental wellness during this time, and more. So important things to take into consideration. So building on our opening from Albert Einstein, thinking about finding opportunity in times of difficulty, I also encourage you to think about this quote from Zig Ziglar. Success occurs when opportunity meets preparation. I challenge you to see the opportunity in this difficult situation, to be planful, proactive, identify strategies that are going to work best for your organization. It's only going to help you to emerge stronger from this difficult time, and to overcome these challenges to better not only your organization, but your employees as well. So at this time, I'd like to open the floor to questions. If you have a question, again, I invite you to share that question by hovering your mouse over the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen. And then you can type in your question, which will go to our moderator, Jill, who is going to share those questions with me. And we already have one question. The first one says, we have a workforce that some can work from home while others, just lost it for a second here, while others can't. For example, physical job done only in the office. How can we still be a cohesive team when some feel left out if we are engaging with the remote workforce differently? For example, buddies, social happy hours, or the fact that some are jealous that they can't work from home. This is a great question, and one that I think many employers are facing right now, right? You might have a skeleton crew or those who are physically essential to sustain operations for the organization. But then we know from mandates as well as just duty of care responsibilities of employers that we need to support those who can work remotely in doing so, right? So we may be in this situation, I know we at QTI are personally in this situation, where you're challenged to support both in those different work environments. And so we encourage you to think about the tips that we've shared in this webinar and how you can pick the strategies that are going to engage both. So for example, if you have some that are in the office, think about ways that you can, say the remote bingo example I shared. Think about structuring that more as a bingo that applies to both. So perhaps you're including comments that others may hear if they're still in the office, such as, are you still open for business, or things like that, so that you're more inclusive of both. You want to make sure that you don't let perfection be the enemy of good, while you want to be, sensitive and be talking with those employees and find ways for those that are physically required to engage still in the rest of the remote workforce. You also don't want to lose the opportunity to build that connection through some remote strategies as well. So just frequent dialogue, making sure you're clear on an intent, and still finding ways to invite those who are, physically required to be in the workplace to engage. The next question that I see here is, love the idea of doing a virtual book club. Do you have any suggestions for a non-business self-help book? It's a great question. Non-business self-help book. I think that there's a lot of teachings that Brene Brown has. She's one of my favorite authors that have some self-help concepts that can apply beyond work. So she's definitely an author that I highly recommend. There's some that she talks about, finding purpose, finding meaning. But another one that I recently read, it's been around for a while, but I just love, is called Crucial Conversations. And I think it's especially important during this time we find ourselves in. And there's a lot of ways that I've been able to apply the teachings of that in my personal life, right? Such as, in my marriage or just with family members. So that's a really great one that I highly encourage you to check out. We've got some suggestions from other colleagues. My colleague Laura Bermudo, thank you so much, Laura. She's got some other great ones. There's a good one by Rachel Hollis called, she's a great motivational speaker, and she's got a good book called Girl Stop Apologizing, or Girl Wash Your Face. And of course, you can invite men to join in and reading those books, because I'm sure there's actionable takeaways that apply to all beyond that. So those are just a few good ones to consider. The next question, can you share the link for the 37 virtual team building activities? Absolutely. So we're going to be following up with a copy of these slides to all of you. And through the slides, you'll be able to click on that link on the page that I had, the 37 virtual team building activities, and be able to read through all of those. Are there any other questions, Jill, at this time? Oh, another good book idea. Thank you. There's a lot of good ones. Power of Habit is one that's come through as well as a highly recommended. So thank you. I encourage you to check those out. Certainly, if you have any other questions beyond what we shared today, I invite you to reach out to me. I've included my contact information in the last slide here so that you can reach out to me directly. You can also connect with me through LinkedIn as well as others through QTI. Thank you so much for making the time to connect with us, and we wish you all the best for your organizations, and stay well, everyone. Thank you.